Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Lang, the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity in Morrison County, and also the chairwoman of our Faith Not Fear group, which is a group of concerned citizens that address specifically currently the homelessness population in Morrison County. Right now we have with us Christine Grahams, the district liaison at the Little Falls Community Schools. And she will be talking a little bit about what the homelessness population looks like within the school district and the prevention measures they are currently taking to prevent further homelessness in our county. Thanks, Christine, for joining us today.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate your introduction. And Homeless Liaison is just one of the assignments that I have at the district, but I think it's one that touches my heart the most. And I have to say that my involvement as the liaison is in somewhat of an administrative and a compliance role, in that every district in the state of Minnesota is required to have a liaison to gather statistics about our homeless children and youth and roll that information up to the state of Minnesota. That then they use that to create a clearer picture of homelessness by county, by region, etc. And so the real people I want to give a shout out to that do the boots on the ground supporting our students and our families is our school social workers and our school guidance counselors, as well as the teachers in our schools. They're the first line of identification and support for those students. And so I'm happy to speak to you here today. The truth is just, it's easier for me to get away from my office than our social workers and our counselors who really know and do this work deeply. So I think you had a question for me in there. So I think it was, what does homelessness look like in our district or in our schools? And I think just a little bit of background might be beneficial. Schools are mandated by the federal government back, like dating to the 80s, for identification, support, and education of students and their families who are experiencing homelessness, or a term that's really getting some traction now is housing transition. Because as I talk a little bit more, you'll get an idea that it can look different than maybe we always think it does. And so that law that governs our work there is called the Mckinney-Vento Law, and it was re-upped, I guess, in 2015, and that mandates schools to identify students who may not be experiencing a fixed, regular, and adequate home. Fixed meaning it's the same place. Regular, meaning they know they can go there with some permanence and won't be asked to leave. And adequate, is it a sufficient amount of space? Is it a safe space? Is it a place where they can do the things to be successful in school? Safely sleep, safely eat, safely study, those sorts of things. And just a broader context, in the state of Minnesota, there's close to 1.5 million homeless and in housing transition children and youth. And I lied, that's a bad statistic. The United States, that's the stat. The state of Minnesota is over 17,000. And in Morrison County, I don't have the whole county number. I know that our schools routinely are recording about in the 20s. Now, an exception to that was during the year of COVID. We saw that number drop, and I think it was due to a couple of things: the eviction moratorium, as well as our ability to really be with our students as often as we normally would to identify kids who are in need of support. So I think when you ask, what does homelessness look like for our students? If I said that there's, let's say, 25 students, E through grade 12, or actually E through age 21, so our continuing education center students as well, it can look a variety of ways. It might be a family who has young children or children of various ages who for some reason has undergone economic hardship, either through loss of job, reduction in income, unexpected expenses, change in family status, divorce or other things that cause maybe that double income to reduce. Additionally, it could be people who've undergone a natural disaster that has left them in housing transition. And then We also see some of our older students who are leaving their homes for reasons of either they no longer feel that it's a safe place to be physically, there might be issues going on in the home that make it no longer an emotional or a physically safe place for them to be, whether that is violence, drug abuse, or maybe their own reconciling with sexual orientation that sometimes makes staying home not a safe place for them to be. So we see that. So there's really like no one face of homelessness. We just know that as a school district, we are called to do whatever we can to identify those students and to offer supports. So that means we need to make sure that our students are immediately qualified for free lunches. And then we also like to connect them with our weekend food backpack program, which our district has run for a number of years now, where students who identified as needing just additional food, no huge formal application process necessary, but typically through teacher identification or things like that. Well, then when we identify a student as homeless or in transition, we connect them with that food backpack program as well. We are required as a district then to make sure that transportation isn't a barrier to their continuing education. One of the things Mckinney-Vento likes to do, requires us to do, is says, school should be that one stable place. Maybe when home isn't anymore, maybe when now I have to go to St. Cloud to live with grandma and grandpa and mom and my siblings, and that's a situation we call like doubling up, when you're sharing the home of someone else, unintended. Like it's not like, oh, it's a mutually agreeable thing and we're going to share the rent and we're going to do all this. No, it's more out of necessity and need, and it has more of a temporary nature. Mckinney-Vento says we need to transport those students back to our district so that if that's appropriate, age-wise, development-wise, everything else, if all parties agree that that's the best thing for the student, then they should stay in Little Falls Community Schools, and we're required to transport them there. So food, transportation, access to title services, which all of the schools in our district are school-wide title, and so that means you don't have to be identified as needing Title I services to actually access that support. So, but it's just that awareness that this student could use maybe some academic supports, because maybe, well, just the emotional turmoil of being in any of those situations might, call out for a little additional support. And then there are districts larger than ours with systems that are probably a little more developed than ours that help reach out for medical needs and things like that. I would like to say that Little Falls District certainly is willing, if we learn about those things, to try to support some of those things in our families who might need them. It's really about connecting them to the resources. That's why our school social workers are the champs at doing this, because they're really good at connecting with families and connecting with other services too. So.
That's amazing work. I'm intrigued. I'm going to kind of go off script because
go right ahead.
As you're talking about all the help and the resources that students have, how are students, if I was a student and didn't have a home, I would feel probably some shame and guilt that I did something wrong. How is that? What is the approach taken there?
And I think what I hear from our school social workers is that they learn about homelessness in a variety of ways, and very rarely is it I don't have a house right now, or my family is homeless. Our students don't really use those words, but you might hear either from parents or the students themselves like, oh, I don't really know my new address, or we just recently moved and I don't really know my new address, or we just got to town and we haven't got that settled yet, or I'm staying with a friend for a few days, and so it really takes some trust building, some relationship building, and some sleuthing a little bit. However, our school social workers then do reach out to parents and families and say, might have had a conversation here. Is there something that we can be of support of? And I think you hit on something, and that is some of that stigma that sometimes people who are experiencing homelessness feel. And I think that's why the term housing transition is more empowering, because it doesn't label someone as homeless forever, and it doesn't engender maybe some of those stigmatizing images we have of like living under the bridge, or out of the van, or in a park, because it doesn't always look like that. And in fact, in our district, most of our students who are who are homeless, excuse me, double up with family or friends, or occasionally we're fortunate to get a shelter placement, but because we don't have a local shelter, they're often having to transport from a town that is further away. Sometimes, and generally if this is as a result of a natural disaster, we'll see our families put up in hotels because we know that that's a little more defined until we can get them into another situation. But doubling up is far and away our largest one, which again is just staying with someone where there is the potential to be asked to leave. Like, so it's a tenuous thing. Even if it might be family, it's not a guarantee, and so it's stressful. So I think we're really working to say, in terms of losing the stigma, like think about how many of us could be, you know, 1 or 2 paychecks away. How many of us might have an unexpected medical bill that comes out of nowhere that wipes out our savings, that loses a job, and goodness knows our community has seen that in the past. And so they're not always shameful things. Certainly we do see some overlap, not always, but we know that there are issues in our community, whether it's substance abuse or mental health, that compound these situations, but they're not always a both-and scenario by any means.
So all of the work you're doing, which is wonderful, and we have to start with helping our children, takes time and money. Is money from the state coming through, or how can our community help the students? I know I sit on a mission group at my church, and we've talked about the care closet and donating money to help those students in need.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a couple of things. One is our school has many ways, and we're so fortunate. We have a very giving community, either private individuals, civic groups, things of that nature. So I'd be missing an opportunity to say thank you for all those generous donations already. And so our district has ways that people can connect to all students, because that's the other thing. We're talking about homeless children and youth, but there's a whole subgroup of students who need additional support, need additional food, clothing, hygiene items that aren't necessarily identified as homeless. If we're only identifying, you know, mid-20s, we're probably under-identifying homeless, but we're definitely not capturing the volume of students who have needs. And so you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned our care closet. Our care closet functions at our middle school and our high school, and those were kind of internally grown, envisioned by one of our teachers, Heidi Larson, at the high school, and her staff and her students kind of got the high school one up and running, and that has donor contributions of food, of hygiene products, of clothing, new and gently used, that our high school students can come in and say, you know, jeepers, the holiday is coming up, I'd like to get something for my mom and dad, but, and so can they shop through some of those things? For sure. So, and yeah, the audience can reach me at cgrams@lfalls.k12.mn.us, or give me a call at 320-632-2013, and I'm happy to connect you to people who can help out. So.
That's awesome. Thank you, Christine, for joining us today. And I just want to give a shout out to Habitat for Humanity. We'll be taking applications for another home. We are building one currently right now on the west side. So after the first of the year, please give me a call at 616-2084 if you would like an application, and I'll get that sent out. Thank you.